It was fall in the year 9 AD. Roman troops could be found in the deserts of Africa and the forests of Germany. The Roman Empire was at the height of its power. The Senate in Rome thought the northern border was safe. The barbarian groups had been tamed, trade lines had been set up, and Roman governors had been chosen. But far beyond the Rhine River, past the outposts and the maps, a storm was coming that would destroy 3 armies and change the empire's future. The person picked to calm down. Germania was Governor Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus was an experienced administrator who had more experience in politics than in war. He was sure of himself, maybe too sure of himself. He thought that Roman law and order could bring the wild Germanic tribes into the modern world. Young nobleman Arminius, who was his friend and valued advisor, stood next to him. He was a man of many worlds. Arminius had been in the Roman army and learned Latin strategy and order. But he still loved the woods where his people lived, and there was rebellion in those woods, hiding like a wolf in the dark. More than 20,000 men made up Varus's army. It had 3 full legions, units of horse, and thousands of camp followers. They were soldiers who were well-trained, protected, and proud. But they were also very far away from home, in a place where Rome had never heard of ghosts or gods. As summer came to an end, Varus heard that a tribe in the north was rising up. His faithful guide Arminius told him to quickly put down the rebellion by marching through the dense Teutoburg forest. It was a small, muddy and windy path. But Varus had full faith in Arminius. He should, right? The young German had sworn allegiance to the eagle standards, become a citizen, and fought with Roman soldiers. There was less light in the sky as the troops moved into the forest. It rained non-stop and the ground turned into a swamp. It was hard for men to stay in formation. Wagons got stuck in the mud, and supply lines were thin. Varus kept going anyway. What did he tell his men to do? Cut down trees, fix up paths, and pull their heavy guns through the mud. It was just another battle for the Romans. Arminius saw it as the start of his revenge. Arminius had already brought together the Cherusci, Bructeri, and Marsi, along with other Germanic groups, to fight the Romans and take their land. Varus didn't know or understand this. While Varus walked deeper into the bush, Arminius left, saying he was going to get more help. In fact, he disappeared into the fog to set up a trap. Thousands of fighters hid in the trees. They had paint on their faces and their weapons were off. As they stood there, helpless and exposed, they watched the endless Roman columns snake through the wilderness. The troops moved forward for 2 days. It kept raining. The men were getting antsy, and their armor was getting dirty. At night, they heard strange horns far away and saw hints of fire in the trees. Varus thought they were just silly tribal rites or the howls of barbarians. But the pros felt something else, an unease that crept up on top of their calm. The trees around them seemed to close in on them, making it hard to breathe and hear. Even the horses started to feel scared. The trees then blew up in the morning of the 3rd day. First there was a cry, a deep roar that could be heard in the hills. Arrows fell from the sky and spears shot out of the darkness. The Roman column, which was miles long, broke apart into a mess. Legionaries tried to line up, but the landscape was against them. Their shields got stuck in the mud, and trees and trucks broke up their formations. It seemed like the Germans came at them from all sides, and they were gone before the Romans could fight back. Varus tried to get his guys together. "Hold the line!" He yelled, "Form testudo!" But there was no room on the narrow road. There was a lot of chaos as centurions were killed and standards were knocked over. Rome's well-oiled machine turned into a huddled mass of men trying to stay alive. Arminius rode with his soldiers, his Roman armor wet with blood and rain. He yelled in Latin, making fun of the empire that used to call him a friend. When it got dark, the forest turned into a bad dream. The storm was mixed with the screams of people who were dying. The hurt people crawled through the mud and were killed by blades they couldn't see. The Germans didn't spare any people. They set fire to the wagons, stole the goods, and cut up the dead. The eagle standards, which stood for Rome's spiritual power, were dragged around in the mud. When Varus realized the fight was over, he couldn't take the shame of losing. He fell on his own sword when he was surrounded and cut. His guards followed him. The troops who were still alive tried to run away, but the forest ate them all up. The killing went on for 3 days. When it was over, the bodies of 3 whole companies, or more than 20,000 men, were spread out on the forest floor. The empire didn't find out about the accident until weeks later, when survivors, who were very sick and broken, stumbled back to the Rhine. Rome was hit hard by the news. When Emperor Augustus heard it, he tore his clothes and yelled, "Quintili vari, legiones ready. Varus, give me back my armies." But they didn't come back. The Teutoburg forest turned into a cemetery, which hurt Rome's pride. What started out as a march to bring order back had turned into one of the worst events in Roman history. It was a lesson that was not written in ink, but in blood. Before the killing, Germania looked like a frontier that was almost taken over. In the wild lands east of the Rhine, roads were being built, taxes were being collected, and Roman law was being made known. For guys like Varus, it was the start of a new province. But it was really just a mirage, a weak illusion made by one person, Arminius, the fighter Rome had put the most faith in. Arminius had been taken from his tribe as a hostage many years before. This was a typical Roman practice meant to make sure people would be loyal. He had worked hard in the troops and was now an eques, which means Knight of Rome. He had also become a citizen, which was a big deal for a barbarian. He was very good at Latin and learned a lot about Roman army strategy, including how they thought, marched, and fought. But deep down, Germania's blood still burned. He had seen how proud the conquerors were, how his people were put down, and how their freedom slowly faded under Roman rule. He waited calmly, smiling at the dinners, saluting the generals and whispering words of loyalty, all the while planning their demise. I think Arminius did a great job in the months before the attack. He ate with Varus, talked about plans, and told him which tribes to honor and which to punish. When the governor heard that there was a rebellion, Arminius told him to act quickly and take the shorter path through the forest to put down the rebellion. His confidence made people feel good. Even Varus's most experienced centurions, who had fought in wars in the east, didn't think there was any reason to doubt him. Arminius did wear Roman weapons, talk like a Roman official, and swear by Roman gods, after all. But behind the scenes, he was working to bring the Germanic groups together, which was something Rome had never thought was possible. It was his own family, the Cherusci, who joined with the Bructeri, Chatti, and Marsi. Tribes that used to fight each other now had one goal in mind: to wipe out the armies that had ruined their land. Their leaders took oaths over holy groves as they met under the moonlight. The gods of the forest wanted blood, and Arminius said he would give it to them. Arminius also fled when the legions went into Teutoburg. He told Varus that he would get help to put down the revolt. Instead, he ran off into the wet hills to get ready for the last blow. He had scouts follow every Roman step, wagon, and weak spot. The Germans knew the area well, including the bogs, slopes, and tight passes that cavalry couldn't get through. They used the bush itself as a weapon. It wasn't a fight when they attacked. It was a killing. It went from a steady beat of the Roman march to a cacophony of screams and chaos. The Germans struck in waves, going away and coming back like ghosts. Rome's order didn't mean anything for the first time. In the mud, their wall of shields, the testudo formation, fell apart. Weapons got dull, armor got broken, and order fell apart. The dream of Roman Germania was over by the time the last cries died down. Only pieces of the troops made it out alive. Wounded men were seen crawling toward the Rhine. Their sounds echoed through the fog. They brought tales of treachery, of friends being hung from trees, of eagles being harmed, and of a name that was whispered with both fear and hate: Arminius. In Rome, the news hit like a knife to the heart. Messengers who were pale and shaking stumbled into the imperial house. They talked about Varus's death and how the 17, 18, and 19 armies were no longer on the empire's rolls. Those numbers would never be used again by any Roman army. Emperor Augustus, who was very old at the time, was shocked by the news. A man who the world's conqueror used to call a friend had put him down. Historiographers say he wandered around his castle for days, ripping his clothes and yelling into the night, "Quintilivare, legiones rede." "Varus, give me back my armies." This hurt me deeply on a mental level. Rome wouldn't cross the Rhine again for many years. The border got rougher. Fortresses were built, and the woods beyond turned into a place where ghosts and bad dreams lived. The empire thought it was unbeatable, but now it saw that even Rome could lose. Arminius, on the other hand, had a total victory that didn't last long. People in his own country called him the liberator of Germania and saw him as the one who broke the chains of power. But there was a cost to freedom. Soon the groups got into another fight because of pride and anger. The unity that had been so strong against Rome's armies broke down again. Even his own family turned against him. A few years after his win, Arminius was betrayed and killed by his own family. He wasn't killed by the empire, but by the jealousy of the tribes he had briefly taken over. Still, his fame lived on. The Romans saw him as a rogue because he was a barbarian who had tricked them with their own strategies. For the Germans, he was a sign of defiance because he was the first person to fight the eagle and win. History will remember him as proof that the worst enemy isn't always the one outside the walls, but the one inside them. After that, the empire turned its attention to something else. Rome didn't try to take over more of the wild north. Instead, it strengthened its walls and focused on defense instead. The time of endless growth was over. Every emperor after that would remember Teutoburg as a lesson in how pride and overconfidence can bring down even the strongest kingdom. But the trees never forgot. Bones and rusty armor were buried there for hundreds of years. Coins, helmets, and broken swords from the Roman Empire were hidden under moss, telling no one about the night the empire fell. People in the area said that every fall, when the wind howled through the trees, the souls of the fallen legions still marched, restless and looking for the way home. There was more to Teutoburg than just killing. It was a turning point because Rome learned that even the biggest kingdom could be led astray into the woods and never come back out. Even though years went by, Teutoburg's shadow never went away. The Roman Empire had been shaken to its core. It had once been an unstoppable machine of conquering. It hurt more than just the army to lose 3 divisions. It hurt the people's faith as well. People who lived in that time could remember a time when the gods of Rome turned their faces away. On the edges, troops talked among themselves. Some people said that the woods were still visited by the dead, and that on foggy nights, ghostly armies marched through the trees, their armor making soft clanking noises in the fog. Some people said they heard Varus's voice calling for his lost men. As people joined, superstition spread, and confidence dropped. Even soldiers who had been through years of war were scared when they thought about Germania. It was no longer land, the forest was a curse, but Rome couldn't run away from what had happened. It was important for the country to look good. People from both Rome's enemies and friends watched from the provinces to see if Rome would get revenge for its dead or run away in fear. It was known to Augustus, even though he was old and tired, the emperor had new walls built along the Rhine. Overnight, forts like Vetra and Novisium woke up with new troops. But Augustus himself never tried to start a battle across the river again. Germania was no longer a word that could be used in power. When the old emperor died in 14 AD, Tiberius took over a kingdom that was hurt and still felt bad about itself. He stayed away from the northern woods for years because he chose to be careful over getting revenge. But one of his soldiers, Germanicus, who was Tiberius's nephew and one of Rome's favorite generals, would not rest. Germanicus was eager to learn, young and deeply devoted to the troops. As a child, he had heard stories about Teutoburg, including the deception, the killing, and the shame that still stained Rome's flags. He promised to wash away that shame. 6 years after the killing, in 15 AD, Germanicus led a huge army into Germania. He was ready, unlike Varus. He came with 8 legions, which is about 50,000 men, along with cavalry and river ships to help him. His campaign was all about getting even. The eagles that were lost in Teutoburg were to be found, and Arminius, the rogue, was to be killed. As the Roman troops moved past the Rhine, they didn't come across any organized enemies. The Germanic groups were spread out, and the thick forest covered up all signs of the old roads. Then, early one foggy morning, Germanicus and his men got to an opening, but they got cold. What was left of Varus's death stretched out in front of them. The battlefield had not been taken back by nature. It looked like the forest itself wanted to keep the memory alive by leaving it alone. Skulls stuck in fence posts, skeletons still wearing rusted armor, and weapons half buried in mud were all over the ground. Broken swords stuck out of the ground like tombstones. At the heart of it all were half-rotten wooden altars that showed where Roman officers had been killed and sacrificed to the Germanic gods. It was quiet among the men. A lot of people cried. Some knelt down and kissed the bones of their friends who had died. Germanicus told people to gather the bodies and bury them properly. There were pyres built, incense burned, and the air smelled like smoke and death. The ritual was led by the general, who raised his sword to the sky and swore revenge in front of the ghosts of the dead. Tacitus, a chronicler, said that the men stood there in shock and awe. It rained in the forests, but now they were filled with prayers and vows. Rome had finally come to terms with the fact that it was going to die. But as always, getting revenge cost something. Arminius and his soldiers attacked again, making life hard for Roman columns by ambushing guards and then running away before they could be attacked back. Germanicus won a number of bloody battles, most especially at Idistaviso, but the land was on his side. His fleets were wiped out by storms, his supply lines broke, and his winds were lost in the wilderness. Germania was a land of fog and chaos that could not be taken by sword alone. After 3 years of non-stop fighting, Tiberius called him back. He said that Rome had already gotten its own back enough. It would weaken the kingdom to go any further. The border was fixed and the legions took revenge, even if they didn't beat the enemy. Germanicus followed, but he didn't want to. He went back to Rome a hero, but the war in his heart was still unfinished. In Germania, the tribes were having a party. Arminius had once again resisted Rome's power, even though he was hurt and being chased. But his victory caused more disagreements. Chiefs who had followed him before were now jealous of his fame. Within a few years, Arminius was killed by his own family, showing once more that cooperation among the tribes was short-lived, like the summer in the north. But even after he died, his influence lived on. People in Rome both swore at and admired his name. Arminius stopped Rome at the edge of the world, which had never been done by a king or army before him. The wound was closed by Germanicus's funeral, but the scar would always be there. Rome would never try to make Germania a province again. The Rhine became the line between the empire and the wild, between order and chaos. Poets and generals talked about Teutoburg in whispers for decades afterward. It became a lesson that commanders taught each other. Watch out for cockiness, pride, and allies who smile too much. Rome saw Teutoburg as more than just a battleground. It saw itself in it. It taught them their boundaries, how cocky they were, and how human they were. Even though the kingdom would grow even bigger, the memory of that forest, where rain turned the ground to blood and eagles fell from the sky, would always be there. Even after many years, the whispers would still be there. They would sound like armor in the fog, and like forgotten armies moving toward a dawn that never came. The defeat in the Teutoburg forest did not end with the loss of 3 legions. It rippled outward through politics, philosophy, and faith, a tremor that shook the very foundations of Roman identity. For centuries, Rome had seen itself as invincible. From the deserts of Egypt to the moors of Britain, the legions had never known a true annihilation. But in the rain-soaked woods of Germania, that illusion was stripped bare. The empire, for the first time, realized that it could die. In the years that followed, the shadow of Teutoburg reached deep into the heart of Rome. The Senate met in silence whenever the battle was mentioned. Statues of Varus were quietly removed, his name spoken only as a warning. The families of the slain built shrines, their offerings of wine and flowers laid beneath eagle emblems carved in mourning. The common people whispered that the gods themselves had turned against the empire, that Jupiter's thunderbolts had been answered by the storms of Germania, but perhaps the heaviest burden fell upon Augustus himself. In his old age, the emperor who had turned a republic into an empire found himself haunted by the ghosts of the forest. According to Suetonius, he would pace through his palace at night, tearing at his clothes and crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." His dreams were filled with the sound of marching feet that never arrived. For a man who had built his legacy upon conquest, the loss was unbearable, not just a military disaster, but a personal failure. A crack in the divine perfection he had spent decades crafting. The empire responded in the only way it knew: control. Orders were issued to reinforce the frontiers. The Rhine and the Danube became walls of stone and discipline. Dozens of new forts were constructed, connected by roads and watchtowers. Military doctrine shifted from expansion to preservation. Rome began to see the world not as an open horizon to be conquered, but as a fragile fortress to be defended. The loss also changed the way Rome viewed its soldiers. Gone was the blind faith in discipline alone. Commanders became cautious, scouting every inch of terrain before advancing. Maps of Germania were rewritten with warnings and red marks, like scars upon parchment. For the first time, the empire began to respect the unpredictable: weather, terrain, the will of native tribes. The arrogance of total domination gave way to the pragmatism of survival. Yet even as Rome hardened its borders, it softened its heart. Philosophers and poets began to question the cost of empire. In marble halls, Stoic thinkers like Seneca wrote that fate was indifferent, that no man, not even an emperor, could command fortune forever. The lesson of Teutoburg echoed through their words. Power is fragile, glory fleeting, and pride fatal. Among the people, the story became myth. The forest of the lost legions entered Roman folklore, told around fires and whispered by soldiers marching north. Some claimed that the gods had sent the storm to punish Rome's hubris. Others said Arminius had been a spirit of vengeance, born from the woods to remind mankind that no empire could stand forever. Even in distant provinces, traders spoke of the massacre with awe, describing it as the night when the eagles fell. Politically, the defeat reshaped the empire's ambitions. Under Tiberius, Rome abandoned its dreams of northern conquest. The Rhine became the final border, a line between order and chaos, between the known and the unknowable. The emperor's focus turned inward, toward stability, law, and surveillance. The Rome that emerged from Teutoburg was colder, more calculating. It no longer believed in destiny, only in control. And yet, beneath the layers of discipline and silence, the wound still bled. The veterans who had marched with Germanicus carried home tales of the forest, of bones half buried in mud, of altars drenched in blood, of comrades crucified upon trees. They spoke of eerie calm after the slaughter, of crows feasting upon Roman flesh. To the younger generation of soldiers, these were not just stories. They were warnings carved into memory. In time, the site of the massacre became a symbol. Pilgrims, soldiers, historians, even senators traveled north to see it. Many returned changed. They described the air as heavy, the silence eternal. Some brought back small relics, a coin, a rusted helmet, a splinter of shield, tokens of an empire's mortality. It was said that even the wind there seemed to whisper in Latin, repeating the cries of the dying. The defeat also redefined what it meant to be Roman. Once, identity had been built on conquest, the idea that Roman civilization could tame the world. After Teutoburg, it became about endurance. The empire could lose, could bleed, could falter, but it would never collapse. The Romans began to see themselves not as conquerors, but as survivors. In this way, the tragedy forged resilience. Teutoburg became both a scar and a mirror. Every emperor who followed would study it, fearing another forest, another betrayal. It taught them the limits of empire and the necessity of caution. When Trajan later expanded into Dacia, or Hadrian built his wall in Britain, they did so with Teutoburg in the back of their minds. The ghosts of that forest followed every Roman legion that marched north, whispering, "Remember," and though centuries would pass and Rome would rise to even greater heights, that whisper never faded. The rain, the mud, the forest, they became eternal symbols of human pride undone. No matter how vast the empire grew, every emperor knew that somewhere, deep in the mists of Germania, 3 legions still slept, reminders that even the greatest civilization could vanish in a single storm. Even though many years had passed, the sounds of Teutoburg never really went away. What began as a massacre in the fog turned into a story that lived on through countries. No longer just a loss, it had become a story that people in the West would never forget, a warning passed down from one generation to the next. For Rome, the effects were felt right away and would last forever. The power lived on, but it was less spiritual and more disciplined. The northern border became a line that could never be crossed again. The Rhine was more than just a river, it was a sign and a lifeline between 2 worlds. Rome, with its roads, aqueducts, marble and order, was to the west. The unknown, with its woods, tribes, freedom and chaos, lay to the east. Europe began in that gap that no one could see. Many historians say that Teutoburg Forest was the point in time when Europe split in 2. It was there that Latin culture reached its limits and the first signs of the Germanic world appeared. If Varus had won, history might have been written in a different way. It's possible that the Roman language spread to the Elbe, the Danube, and even the Baltic. But fate had other plans. Beyond the forest rose the tribes that would one day bring down the empire. It became a line that Rome would never cross. A paradox grew from that ground. By losing Germania, Rome made sure that people would remember it for a long time. The empire's borders stayed the same, but its culture spread within the empire, getting better, lasting longer, and being recognized. Rome learned to be careful after the pain of Teutoburg. Every ruler who came after Augustus looked north and saw not chance, but fate. Blood and rain were used to write the price of pride. The story lived on, even though the world changed. By the Middle Ages, Arminius had changed his name to Hermann, which was the name of a Germanic hero. People who were poets and thinkers saw him as the person who freed his people from tyranny. They called him the father of liberty and the destroyer of empires. In Rome's records, he was still a rebel. Still, his name became holy in the woods of Europe. His victory was seen as the start of a country that didn't exist yet. Statues were made and songs were sung in honor of him. There was no real winner or loser in Teutoburg. Instead, it was a story about how people have always been torn between power and pride, unity and chaos. Arminius brought together groups that couldn't stay together. It was impossible for Rome to keep track of its huge kingdom. It was victory for both sides and it ate them up. The forest took everything away, leaving only silence. In the 1800s, modern researchers went back to the site and found it still full of artifacts from the past, such as spearheads, coins with Augustus's face on them, and skulls with sword wounds. The ground itself seemed to remember things. In Germany in 1875, a huge memorial called the Hermannsdenkmal was built to honor the old leader. He stood there and looked west, his sword raised high over the lands that were once controlled by Rome. Under him was a sign that said, "The German people united under this sword." But even when the story won, it still had a lesson to teach. For hundreds of years, countries all over Europe used Teutoburg to defend their conquests, rebellions, or sense of pride. In the past, the forest stood for freedom. Now, it is used to gain power. People who tried to repeat history often forgot the lesson of Teutoburg. Be humble when the empire's limits are reached. In spite of this, the most important thing about that fight is not politics or monuments, but the memory of it. No matter how hard the Romans tried, they couldn't change what had happened. But instead they told a story about it. This story has been used to teach generals and kings lessons for generations. As they won, it became a part of their soul, like a ghost. Even when Rome was at its strongest, with legions marching through Africa, Britain, and Asia Minor, the empire never forgot that 3 legions were still sleeping under the trees in the north. The fight also changed how Rome thought about itself. Before Teutoburg, the kingdom thought that it was meant to grow and that the world was there to be taken over. Because of Teutoburg, Rome started to look at itself more. It was possible to fix roads, make rules stronger, and make cities look better. It became less important for the kingdom to take over the world, and more important to stay alive in it. In this way, the loss in the forest was the start of the Roman Empire as a culture, not just a military power. It was like the gods themselves made Rome stop and look at itself in the mirror to realize that trying to be great without being humble will not work. So, the story lived on and was turned into a tale over time. Teutoburg had something to say about every era, the pride of power, the smarts of the underrated, and the nature's revenge on society. The forest wasn't just a place, it was also an idea. It became a constant reminder that no kingdom, no matter how golden, can defeat the human heart's desire for freedom. The wind is still whispering through the Teutoburg forest after 2,000 years. The trees are now very tall, and their roots are tangled with the bones of troops who used to think they were immortal. As it did that terrible week in 9 AD, the rain falls on a world that was once red with blood. The broken eagles, pieces of Roman armor, and the quiet of the dead are buried deep under the moss somewhere. After Teutoburg, Rome kept rising. It forgot, though. Memory lasts longer than empires, even after a loss. This may be the real victory of history. The story will live on long after the flags fade, the marble breaks, and the swords become dust. The forgotten massacre story, the day Rome met its ghost, and the forest spoke back.